Okay, so very good morning, good afternoon, and a good evening, depending on which part of the world you're watching this webinar from. So today, on behalf of the Board of Urban Environment, also known as BUE, I am Chandana Mitra, invite you to the third webinar organized by BUE. The BUE mission includes within its interests the interactions of the natural and built urban environment with the atmosphere, considering cities as agents of global change, assesses urban environment, implications for engineers and designers, planning and policy, conducts weather forecasting for urban areas and city dwellers, and many more functions of urban climate and related fields. BUE encourages transdisciplinary actions between scientists, private companies, and public actors in order to advance the development of integrated urban climate services and to raise awareness of urban climate in order to improve the potential future policy implications about city management and planning. As the chair of BUE, I would like to thank Dr. Van Duan for leading this effort and all other BUE members for helping with the planning and organization of the webinars. We will have our next webinar in a couple of months. Please look out for notifications from BUE on the AMS webpage. Now, with no further delay, I'll hand it over to Dr. Duan to introduce our esteemed speaker for today's webinar, Dr. Cynthia Rosenweg. Thank you. Dr. Duan, it's yours.
Thank you, Dr. Mitra. My name is Van Duan, a member of BUE. So it's our great honor to have Dr. Cynthia Rosenweg, a world-leading scientist on the urban climate fields, to give us the presentation on climate change and cities emerging direction in research and action. So Dr. Cynthia Rosenweg is a senior research scientist at the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies and an adjunct senior research scientist at the Columbia University Earth Institute. She is also a professor in the Department of Environmental Science at the Barnard College. She is a co-director of the Urban Climate Change Research Network, UCCRN, and co-editor of the UCCRN Assessment Report on Climate Change and Cities, the first ever global interdisciplinary cross-regional science-based assessment series to address climate risk, adaptation, mitigation, and policy mechanism relevant to cities. So thanks, Cynthia, for accepting our invitation for the webinar. So, before we start off, just a little housekeeping. If you have any question during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your GoToWebinar controls panel. So we go through the question and answer after the presentation. So thank you. Now it is time. Let me hand it to Cynthia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Drs. Mitra and Van, and I'm very happy to be with you today for this webinar organized by the AMS Board on the Urban Environment. I believe that the urban environment and the urban climatology, urban meteorology, all aspects of urban areas and climate is crucially important as we go forward to deal with climate change. Because over half the population, of course, the world's population, we all know now live in cities. They're going to be experiencing climate change right there in the cities. And I believe as scientists, we have this enormous challenge ahead of us to really up our game, improve our science, so that we really can rise to the challenge of developing resilience in our cities to climate change, providing the scientific foundation that's needed. So what I'm going to do today is share the network that Bill Selecki and others founded with me, called the Urban Climate Change Research Network, and share its news and findings from the assessment reports that we have done and are doing with UCERN, which is it's like an IPCC Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change for cities. And I'll be explaining about that. And then turning to what are some of the many emerging directions in research and action, because we're no longer in only pure research mode for climate change in cities. We must take action as well. So this want to tell a little bit more, and we call it UCERN. And but every time I say UCERN, that's what it stands for, the Urban Climate Change Research Network. What is its mission? The mission of UCERN is to develop code-generated knowledge that enables cities to fulfill their climate change leadership potential in both mitigation and adaptation. Now you see a star next to cities and a note, which is every time I say cities, what we mean in UCERN is the core cities and their metropolitan regions. And this is a key important part, and actually I believe the first emerging research direction, that we have to broaden our view of cities to include their surrounding regions as well, because a lot of those places, the suburbs, the satellite cities, are getting left out in regard to climate change planning. Another comment is that it's both mitigation and adaptation, because there are some estimates that cities are responsible for up to 70% of greenhouse gas emission. So we have to be thinking about mitigation as well as adaptation as climate scientists. So we're a network of over 1,000 scientists, scholars, and expert practitioners, spanning a broad range of expertise, including urban climate science. And we are very welcome for new members. And at the end of the presentation, you have all the websites to go to the website, and please join us. Our members are in more than 150 developed and developing cities around the world. It is a completely horizontal network. It's not a new kid on the block anymore. It was formed in 2007. At the time when the C40 group came and held a summit in New York. So it's now coming on to almost 15 years old. We do a variety of projects and programs in UCERN, but I want to highlight its main product, which are the ARC3 assessment reports. ARC3 stands for Assessment Report on Climate Change in Cities. As I said, it's analogous to the IPCC reports, which are focusing, now they have some chapters on urban, which is very good, and there's going to be likely a special report on cities from the IPCC in the next assessment cycle. But there is the knowledge needs in cities are so vast that we believe cities deserve their own assessment report, and that's what UCERN does. The first one was published in 2011. That took 4 years, about 100 authors, 50 cities around the world. That's the pink and orange one. The blue and green one is the second, which was expanded to 350 authors from over 100 cities, 16 chapters, 115 case studies, which I'll tell a little bit more about later. And that one, for the 2017, we created, as part of that, in 2015, we launched the summary for city leaders associated with that ARC 3.2 report. And it was launched at COP21, the climate summit in Paris, hosted by the mayor of Paris, with over 1,000 mayors. Now, very exciting news is that ARC 3.3 is now in progress. You can see the mock-up of the first cover. And this, we have to go quicker than we did before, because the need for knowledge and for the decision makers is really so urgent now that we're going to be publishing in 2021 to 2023. So our sleeves are rolled up, and we're working very hard. But there are ways, and very much for all folks who are on this call, we are issuing an invitation to be part of ARC 3.3. It's an open process because we have contributing authors and case study authors. We have a template for anyone who would like to present their work. We have case study templates that you can follow, and we can also hook you up as contributing authors. So to recap and to share the main findings of ARC 3.2, and this is the synthesis of the 16 chapters. It was over 800 pages and 350 authors. When we came to create the summary for city leaders, we realized in chapter after chapter, there were 5 pathways that were brought out in almost every chapter, or some in one, some in another, but multiple times in the chapters across the second assessment report. And the theme was urban transformation. How do we transform our cities so that, in regard to climate change, so that the cities are able to fulfill their leadership potential in both mitigation and adaptation, and really provide leadership for the whole world. So there were 5 pathways that came forward. But before we set out, I call this the yellow brick road to urban transformation, is we have a guiding principle, which is at the center, at the bottom, which is that equity and environmental justice always has to be in mind as we work with cities in their leadership role, in their preparation for cities, in their response to cities, in the knowledge foundation. So that is always in our minds as we set out on the yellow brick road. Here are the 5 pathways, and I'm going to show one slide on each of them in the following slides. But just to quickly share with you what they are. The first one is that in cities, mitigation and adaptation are often combined or interact. So we need to not have a silo between mitigation and adaptation, between those 2 major responses to climate change in cities. The second is on the timescales, that disaster risk reduction, that whole community needs to be linked to the community of researchers and practitioners who do climate change adaptation. Bringing those 2 things together are essential as we go forward as well. The third is how do we create our work? How do we create our knowledge that we are providing for the decision makers? And that is the buzzword of the day is co-generation. That risk information has to be co-generated with stakeholders, decision makers, and scientists, so that the information we provide is truly useful. Fourth, we can never forget the identifying the needs actively of disadvantaged population, bringing them in, of course, into the co-generation of the risk information, the co-generation of the solutions to the urban solutions for each particular city. All cities have disadvantaged populations. They must be part, as we said from our signpost at the beginning, but we recall it now as the 4th, to identify the needs and to answer them. And finally, to establish and advance knowledge networks. The urban climate is so complex. For example, if we don't all join together across our silos, even within our field of urban climate science, then we can really scale up now, which is what is really needed to go forward. So those are the 5 pathways. Now we're going to go through them just a little bit more on each one. So the first one is pathway 1, integrate mitigation and adaptation. So what we're saying, and this is to policymakers, city policymakers who are making the decision that actions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions while increasing resilience are a win-win. So it's not just you have a set of whole mitigation projects and a whole set of resilience projects. We do need in cities to think of these together. So on the left is an example from Helsinki of a district heating and cooling system. And here you can see cooling water coming from the Baltic Sea, all of the pipes that are using and linking to the natural area, as well as creating the green buildings so that there can be resilience as well. So we need to integrate mitigation and adaptation. This integration deserves high priority in urban planning, urban design, and architecture. And in the new Art 3.3, we have a huge team of urban planners, designers, and architects who are going to help everybody do that. On the resilience side, we give an example, of course, of the kind of things that buildings can do in regard to green roofs, drainage surfaces, rain gardens, all the things that cities can do. And these things help to keep often help to keep inhabitants cool during heat waves, collect storm water. I know that that's what Dr. Van is working on, the intense precipitation in cities. So these examples are the kinds of things that we need as urban scientists to provide the science background for these kinds of interventions. The second one is to remember about the disaster risk reduction, all the whole Office of Emergency Management that most cities have now. But they've often been very siloed away from the folks working on longer term climate change adaptation. So really now there's a move to bring those groups together. So because we need to prepare for both timescales at the same time, the current extreme events and longer term changes. So why is that? So if there is a trend in current extreme events, so for example, we mentioned increasing heavy downbursts. That's something that we have in New York City. So for the disaster risk reduction folks who are dealing with that kind of those like inland flooding events, it's important for them to know that those things are already happening more frequently and are projected to happen even more frequently in the future. Otherwise, they're doing just kind of, oh, we're responding to this one and then the next one and the next one, but not with the full knowledge that they need to bring to bear on the preparation for resilience. So that's pathway 2. Pathway 3 is about how do we do what we do in providing risk information for the city decision makers, and co-generation is the buzzword of the day. Risk assessments and climate action plans co-generated with both stakeholders and scientists have been shown to be more effective. So we're not as scientists just saying, oh, we think this is a good idea and throw it over the fence, or here's the risk information that you need and here it is. Instead, we need a dialogue, right? To say, well, which extreme events are you experiencing now? Which ones are the most damaging? What about compound events? What do we need to look at together? We need to listen, as well as we need to be good. We kind of need to stop throwing things over the fence and turn into good listeners as well. These methods enhance relevance, flexibility, and legitimacy of the risk information that we provide. And this is an example of the Urban Design Climate Workshop. I think we have a couple more slides later. So one thing UCERN does, another program that we have, is in cities all over the world, we work with cities themselves to improve urban climate resiliency, reduce energy consumption, enhancing quality of life with a stakeholder-driven process with the urban planners from the cities themselves. And behind you can see the one in Durban. The fourth pathway is this return to our guiding principle of focus on disadvantaged populations. The needs of the most disadvantaged and vulnerable cities and vulnerable citizens, and every city has them, should be addressed in climate change planning and action. And so bringing social scientists into the teams at UCERN and ARC3 is a very, very important part of what we do, so that we bring teams of both the physical scientists as well as social scientists to share information about vulnerability to climate change, because it varies across social groups, economic levels, neighborhoods. And you can see on the left, this is the Social Vulnerability Index for New York City that puts together factors like access to evacuation zones, access to information, people who don't speak the dominant language, education levels, income levels. And we work with social scientists. It's absolutely essential that we don't just think that the vulnerability is equal across whatever city we're working on. And this helps, this kind of analysis very much helps the decision makers do targeting of adaptation resources, this spatial analysis of vulnerability, because the cities don't have unlimited funds. And so this is something I think the urban climate scientists also can really help. Where are the most vulnerable areas throughout a city, and where should the interventions for resilience be targeted? Finally, advanced finance. Yep, I just mentioned we need funds, right? And cities need funds. How do they get them? We have a whole group of economists and finance specialists working on that in ARC3. Governance, there has to be good governance, so these things are not siloed, some of these silos that I was just describing. And then finally, the knowledge networks that we're part of and that you are part of through the BUE. And we want to make a partnership with BUE and UCERN, and we're talking with the organizers, and we're going to be following up on developing that partnership. But these are things like the C40 cities, the GCOM, the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, ICLEI, all these wonderful groups helping cities. And then what UCERN does is it's the network of the researchers and the experts who we're not all in academic. We have great experts, of course, in cities themselves, but we are the part that is doing the research, and our network is focused on research. Now, what we did at the end of ARC 3.2 is we developed scorecards, a spider diagram scorecard, so that cities could self-evaluate how they were doing on the 5 pathways. So you see the 5 pathways in the colors, and then we developed we have hub directors in cities around the world, and they did it for their own cities. You see, these were self-done. These weren't, nobody was grading the cities except themselves. So, because this idea beyond planning to implementation, this is the action where we are right now. Cities are doing things. So it begins with assessment, then moves on to planning, initial implementation, and evaluation, so that you can cycle back and do mutual learning. And these spider diagrams are a tool for that. Okay, let's move to the third assessment report, which just 2 weeks ago, we held the kickoff workshop online virtually. And we have these screenshots of everyone when we turned on our Zooms from cities all over the world who were part of it. It's going to be a set of 12, what we call elements or special reports, and published again by Cambridge University Press. So what you can see across all these topics are how broadly the information needs are, how broad the information needs are, all the way from some of the ones we've just been mentioning, but the specific infrastructure systems themselves. Nature-based solutions is coming very much to the fore in cities. The psychology of perception, communication, and behavior. How do you get city folks to actually step up to mitigate and take public transportation, especially now with COVID getting back on the subways, people don't want to. And the role of data and role of technology. I think that's something that many of you can be very much helping on. And circular economies are very much coming to the fore. How can we advance those for cities? But what I just pulled a couple of ideas for 3 areas for emerging directions. Urban climate science, of course, because of being here with you at AMS. COVID-19, cities and climate change, everything now we have to, I believe, have COVID-19 and the recovery in mind. And then just a bit more on architecture, urban design, and planning, because this really is such, I think it's a natural partnership between the urban climate science and the architects, urban designs, and planning that actually use the risk information that the climate scientists in urban areas provide. So turning first to urban climate science, these are the major ARC 3.2 findings, and the new research questions is for ARC 3.3. A very traditional area is the urban heat island, and I should also say the precipitation islands as well, and those precipitation, the effects of urban areas on precipitation. What we need to do now, we all know urban centers are warmer, right? But how will the urban heat island change with climate change? That, I think, is still a research area. But if any of you are working on that, please let us know and come on board. I think also the precipitation, of course, is very important as well. And I think the issue on the temperature side of the surface temperature, and how it relates to the air temperature in cities, it was so complex. We have wonderful data from NASA, of course, and the other satellites on what the surface temperature is. But then how does this really translate to what the folks walking on the streets and being in the buildings are? So these are some of the things. I'm happy to hear from you all too about what you see as key new research questions. Extreme events, clearly hugely important. Some of the questions are, of course, what is CMIP 6 saying about changes in extreme events? Are there any new insights coming out of the new GCM projections? Rapid ice sheet melting and the potential for high risk sea level rise. On the one hand, I think is very important. We included this in our latest New York City Panel on Climate Change report. But then also right now, nuisance flooding is happening in many places, and with the sea level rise that we've been having now, and neighborhoods are experiencing flooding. What can we do about that? What can we do to understand it better, and how do we deal with it? The final one is then taking all these projections and really thinking together on how to advance climate services for adaptation. It's not just climate services. This is for the implementation of actions, what is needed. So here's an example, by the way, of some work that we did with C40 and GCOM, in which we did a projection of how urban populations would increase, as well as taking the climate projections, finding out all across the world that there are going to be significant increases in the people living in cities regularly exposed This is to the hottest 3-month average temperature, reaching at least 35 degrees C. So I think globally, more studies like this are very helpful. And then though, drilling down to cities, not just the big ones, but small and medium as well, as how do we deal with this? And how do we bring this information to the folks who can, so we can help develop interventions. This is my final one on what I really think is needed also from the urban climate scientists is indicators and monitoring systems for climate change in cities. Again, a lot of people call for this, but I don't think it's ever been set up really. And we worked with the New York City folks, and we're trying to get them to set it up. It's hard because you have to create the indicators, climate impacts, vulnerability, and resilience, right? You have to then have a stakeholder process so that you're making sure that these indicators that we're tracking are useful. Then who are the data collection agencies? This is like probably an unfunded mandate. You have to have processing centers. You have to have the decision makers on board. And you have to have then really tracking policies, projects, and programs that are responding to the new, to this new to the new climate as it evolves in the cities, because we have climate as the first word and change as the second word. So this is one of my big hobby horses, that this is what we need in every city. So happy to discuss further and get ideas for that. The second area I want to focus on is in terms of emerging areas, of course, is COVID-19 and its intersection with climate stresses. So we formed immediately in New York City. You may know that New York City was one of the initial hotspots of the pandemic. And we formed a research consortium to analyze the riskscape of compound socioeconomic and environmental risks. And these are some of the research questions that we worked with, and we also worked with, that we developed, and we worked with the New York City Department of Transportation, Department of Health, Department of Parks, who were actually creating real-time interventions in particular cool streets and open streets to deal with the pandemic as it occurred. So some of the questions, of course, are they at which New York neighborhoods are highest risk to both COVID and climate stresses? What are the physical and social factors that influence these? How are they related? How are the interventions? What are they, and are they being effective? And how can future city interventions be planned? So here's some of the results from this research consortium. The first is on heat vulnerability. So what you're looking at in this map is the high heat vulnerability areas are in the pink. We have the caseloads are in for COVID-19 are in gray. And the circled regions, oops, hold on a second. Just a second, sorry. I'm just trying to be able to read it. The circled regions indicate places where there is high heat vulnerability and the absence of the significant presence of open or cooled streets, because the blue and the turquoise lines are showing those programs that were implemented last summer. And what we found in particular from this analysis, we were able to identify high compound risk within the neighborhoods, in particular of the South Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens. And by the way, we used NASA data for the temperatures, for the temperature factor in the analysis. We also looked at coastal flooding. So here, we identified census tracts, again, that are affected by high rates of COVID, and also coastal flooding, and that lie in low evacuation priority zones. The city, this is on the Office of Emergency Management. They have very detailed plans for dealing with hurricanes, since we are in a hurricane zone. But this added potential now with high spikes of COVID, which we're coming out of it now, but there could be future pandemics. And how, if there's coastal flooding, and people can't get out to get to an evacuation center, there can be issues of combined health and coastal flooding risks. So here we showed that when we look at this combination of compound risks and the spatial analysis, we see high vulnerability in the Bronx, Queens, and Staten Island. So I think this kind of work going forward is definitely a very important emerging research direction. The final area to highlight is what I shared a little bit about urban design climate workshops. And this is also a really, really important way for urban climate scientists to work at, really in an integrated way and be on the teams with these urban planners and designers and architects. And if maybe some of you have done it, if you haven't, I highly, highly recommend see if you can get on a project with some of these folks. It is so they are so creative, and they use their imaginations. They're all experts in what they do, as you can see from this slide that of all this material. But they really are. And they are in some ways, I think, the hope for the future of our cities. And guess what? They want to work with urban climate scientists, because you can see this urban heat island. They didn't do that themselves. Our hookup with UCERN urban climate scientists provided that. Also, because they have, they're very integrated in their way of thinking. They really understand from the get-go that there has to be carbon footprint studies to reduce greenhouse gases, as well at the same time of reducing the negative impacts of extreme heat, and also better managing the stormwater-induced flooding and sea level rise. So all of these things come together in urban design, and we hold these wonderful workshops. And if anybody's interested, also, first of all, in helping to organize one for the cities where you are, get in touch. And we'd love to work with as many cities as possible doing these kinds of workshops. And by the way, they are not one-off, and they are not helicoptering in, helicoptering out. We're so beyond that in what we need to do right now. We need to be developing the strong relationships long-term with all of the groups. And that's what I meant when I said it's fully horizontal. And once we are part of, once our network is like forever. Because the climate change challenges are so challenging across every city that we can't do just one project in and out or one workshop. That will not work. So we establish relationships, and these workshops are part of the way that we do that. Here's the other one that I showed before in Durban, South Africa. That one was also, this was the first one, and we are planning the second one now, and really looking forward to getting back with the colleagues in Durban to take the next steps. This is finally at the end. I want to invite everyone to another webinar, which UCERN is co-hosting. It is on Wednesday, May 26, 2021. It's 4 to 6. It's hosted by the Roosevelt House, which is a wonderful think tank at Hunter College, in the home of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, former home of those wonderful, wonderful leaders. And what we're going to be doing there, it's motivated by President Biden's administration's climate initiative to really encourage as much as possible focus on urban areas in in the new administration's climate action plans, and to also link and build on and build out the collaboration between cities and universities. And this is a lot what UCERN is about. And so, but we'll be joining with others other organizations that work on fostering these kinds of collaborations as well. Getting back to that pathway, that urban pathway of co-generation of our urban climate change knowledge, so that it can be as effective as possible, and ongoing relationships as well. Because we learn more and more, as we learn more and more, we need to have mechanisms by which that learning can evolve as climate changes. So to conclude, first, equity and environmental justice absolutely need to be front and center in regard to everything that we do with climate change in cities. Co-generation with stakeholders is more essential than ever as we go to scale up and implement urban transformation. And to say UCERN and ARC 3.3 are in full swing, please, you are all invited to join UCERN and to be a part of ARC 3.3. The final point is back to COVID, that as we recover, we need to build back better. I'm sure you've heard that expression. We need to not forget climate change as we get back into, for example, our cars, right? And head all around. But if we don't think about climate change at the same time as we are recovering, we are not going to be responding to these two absolutely significant global systemic threats: the pandemic threat, and coming out of this one, but there are certainly ones looming in the future, and the long-term global systemic threat of climate change that affects all of our cities. With that, thank you so much. Here are some websites, and happy to take some questions and hold a discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cynthia, for your very nice, great presentation and very informative. If you have any question, please type in the question panel. Here I saw one question from the Alan Robox. So in your presentation, Cynthia, so you did the analysis on the New York cities, but the result maybe it does not reflect the New Jersey and Long Island. So yes, so the question from Alan,
Alan, yes, hi Alan. Alan and I are very old and dear colleagues. Great question. This is, I'm really glad, because we were discussing this and saying that this is a point I wanted to make. I tried to make this, that we can't just focus on the 5 core areas, like in New York City, the 5 boroughs anymore. We really absolutely must, and must take the entire metropolitan region into account. And there have been some programs that do that, but there need to be more. So Alan, and others, I've been asked to develop a proposal for an Aspen Global Change Institute workshop it's called Climate Change in Metropolitan Regions, and the subtitle is Don't Forget the Suburbs and the Satellite Cities. So we did it with the New York City panel on climate change. It has been very focused on the 5 boroughs, but the original work, just one more comment, was on the whole metropolitan region. And we need now in the US National Climate Assessments, and I think in any kind of urban assessment in the cities around the world, we really, and maybe we should even change the name and say metropolitan regions and not say cities anymore, because it's a misnomer. Because what coordination, by the way, so here's an example. The sea level rise projections that are used in New Jersey, coming from Rutgers University, where Alan is a professor, right? Ours come from Columbia University, and then Connecticut. Those are the 3 states of our metropolitan region, and every group is doing something different. And you know, so one of the things we've started to talk to each other about how to coordinate, because what if one state is developing interventions for one thing and one set of projections, and another place in the region not something different. So coordination, I think, is very important across the whole metropolitan regions. So even though they may not be, of course, tied, because tide gauges, for example, are different. So great question.
Okay, thanks, Cynthia. So the next question is from the Peter Krang. I just read here. So thanks, Cynthia. When you discuss co-generation of knowledge of stakeholder, who is included in the stakeholder list?
Yes, thank you. That's also a great and very, very, very important question. Because there's what I often say is there's a universe of stakeholders. And really, as we as urban climate scientists interact with stakeholders, we have to ask that question that was just asked. So in many studies and assessments, the stakeholders have been the government, the urban city government, right? But more and more, and this is why I was emphasizing equity and environmental justice so much in my talk, more and more, there's the growing realization that the community groups must be involved in basically completely and substantively from the beginning of any kind of assessment, and then through to planning and implementation. Because these are the people who those interventions are going to be affecting, and they know themselves. There may be something that perhaps the city government comes up with that will be detrimental if they have not, if the environmental justice groups and action groups have not been there from the beginning. A government could be creating an intervention that actually is detrimental to the community. And so it's really this is very much a growing realization that the process has to be truly inclusive from the beginning.
Yes. Thanks, Cynthia. Yes, so there's one question. This question from the Samantha Basile. There's many questions here. So I just let me extract one here to ask you is how have cities used their self-evaluation? Has is led to identification of maladaptation to better know what doesn't work as much as what works.
Right. Yes. So that is a very good point, that cities need to have this, this is really, those spider diagrams are also linked to the indicators and monitoring. We need to be building in self-learning mechanisms so that if something doesn't work, we know about it, and then cities can adjust. So in the very beginning, when we started the New York City Panel on Climate Change, one of the things we did was we went over to London, and also we invited the folks from London to come over to New York. And the London folks had just come up with a concept. I think we actually kind of gave the name to it, but it really did come from them. And it's called Flexible Adaptation Pathways. And so we have some papers which, you know, we're happy to share, in that you have to create, basically it's like a working model, a working plan for how is the city really going to address adaptation. There's never enough funds to do everything, right? And like building, you know, billions of dollars of flood barriers may not be the first approach, although of course NPCC recommended that they needed to be studied. But what there needs to be is built-in mechanisms, decision support mechanisms for just making those decisions through time. As the climate change evolves, maybe the risk level is getting higher, right? And that then a set of interventions has to be, a new set of interventions has to be implemented, or existing ones have to be strengthened. And these two things, the spider diagram and this flexible adaptation approach, they're really designed to help cities do that and come to those realizations themselves. But I'm just thinking that, by the way, that spider diagram is not set in stone. So we used it with our, we have a class at MIT on cities and climate change, and we had the students each pick a city. They were grouped into cities that they were doing their work on all semester. And they gave some they were great, because they were saying, look, before you even start out on a report card, you need more information about the cities, because cities are not equal in their resources to tackle climate change, and that you needed to have, even before you get to the actual evaluation of the programs, information about what is the development level of the city, for example. So all of these things, I think this idea, maybe we should add also something about something that's to capture what's working and what's not working. So thanks for the suggestion.
Yes, yes, I agree with you that each city, all cities are not equal, and that we need some self-learning mechanism or self-learning framework that we can apply for whole cities. Yes, very nice concept of self-learning mechanism. So there's one more question. Yeah, there's a lot of question now. So from the Aileen C, that's could you comment on challenges associated with securing funding from agency and foundation for such kind of sustained work?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, great question at the end. And those challenges for cities and cities research are very, very real. Why is that? It's because cities are not organized to fund research. They have to run their city. So they don't have any real mechanisms for funding the research that they actually need in regard to climate change. You see, when you think about a nation, right, nation state, they have a whole research funding mechanism, including the academies of science, the national science foundations. Countries all over the world have these mechanisms, right? But we often say nobody funds cities. Who funds cities research, right? So we're seeing now some beginning realization that funding, much more funding we need to do, and that's one reason why let's partner with AMS and BUE and UCERN and other city groups to make a massive call for more funding. So the city groups are doing, the C40s, of course, the foundations have done a lot. In particular, of course, Mayor Michael Bloomberg, former Mayor Michael Bloomberg of New York, has funded, he funds C40, he's funded a lot of action in cities, research in cities. But it's really quite still a challenge because there's no actual real societal mechanism. NASA, we were talking about, NASA has been stepping up and doing some work. But I think we should work together to really form and say, this is so crucial that that people understand that we have to step up to to provide the research needed that's actually going to enable the cities, because cities are actually going to be where huge amount of climate change response, both in reduction of greenhouse gases, right? And then this whole, and then being on the front lines of the extreme events. So as scientists, I think we have a very important, massive and significant case to make that we need massive ramp ups in funding for urban climate science. And I'd be happy to work with you on that.
Yes, yes, very difficult to get to link what the urban climate scientists do with some business chance. Yeah, I understand this. Yeah. So okay, let's me move forward to the next question. So from the Kelly Depot, so when considering the cities and surrounding municipality, so do rural area factor in and how?
Yes, good question. Yeah, one thing that UCERN worked a lot on is the SDG 11, Sustainable Development Goal 11, which was for the first time in the UN SDGs, there is an urban SDG. So we co-led the campaign to get the urban SDG. So this is a joke. I would bring my sleeping bag down to the United Nations. I went to so many meetings at the UN about this. And the biggest pushback, there was a lot of pushback. And the biggest pushback was from rural areas, because they felt that there was going to be transfer of resources from the rural areas to the urban areas if there was an SDG related to cities. Sustainable cities. So then we embarked on a whole series of meetings between the rural folks and the urban folks, so that we could talk to each other and create a new narrative that in fact the rural and the urban are connected, and that we need to work together, and we need to understand the dynamics of course between the urban and the rural as well. So, and as we're thinking about circular economy, it'll be very interesting in ARC 3.3 to bring the experts. And if anybody is an expert on circularity in cities, please be in touch. It'll be very interesting to see how they deal with that circular issues, bringing in not just within a city, but also with the rural areas, because clearly they're connected.
Okay, thanks, Cynthia. So there is one more, our last question from the attendees. So could you share some sustainable challenges in some tropical city like in Dubai, UAE? This question from the Afila bin Hamad.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I'm just thinking about that. We have hubs. I mentioned this. UCERN has hubs around the world, but we don't have one in the Middle East. So we would like to explore setting up one. so that we could have a very direct answer to that question. Because what we find is each area, so we have two in Africa, we have Asia, we have Australia, Oceania, we have Latin America, we have two and we have Europe, we have Nordic nodes, but the Middle Eastern cities are so important. The challenge is, of course, just really, are, and we need case studies of them. So we'd like to work with you on the case studies. But I mean, clearly the extreme heat levels are, of course, absolutely critical. And the any coastal city there as well. Dubai, I believe, is a coastal city. So sea level rise, and then of course water resources. Just this is really just right off the top of my head. But how to deal with some of these extreme environments in regard to extreme heat, and thinking then I think also about mitigation as well as adaptation there and resilience, and bringing those together in the context of the Middle East would be very important.
Yes, yes, that's this very important to involve whole area, whole city, and all region, so we have comprehensive view of what we're doing. Yeah, I agree with this. Yeah. So yes, we have all the question and here. So Chana, do you have anything?
No, I think we are 1 minute on the top of the hour. So I think, honoring everyone's time and Dr. Rosenwig's too, we should bring an end to the webinar. But I would personally, as well as from the BUE team and the whole urban climate group, the consortium, and everyone working on this, thank Dr. Rosenwig for doing this for us. And we're looking forward to more collaborations together, because we cannot do it on our own. Everyone has to work together to do whatever good we have to do for this one planet we have. And we only have one planet. We know that very well. So with that, if any other parting comments you want to make before we want to end this webinar?
I just would like to say thank you so much for inviting me. I've participated in AMS seminars for decades, so I'm happy to do it. And look forward to seeing also many of you at the AMS annual meetings, and which probably will still be virtual, but we'll see. But and interacting and creating a partnership with UCERN and the BUE.
Thank you.
That's a great idea to have cooperation. Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone.
So yes, I think this is also the time to finish today's webinar. So again, thanks Cynthia for your great presentation. There is a lot of information in your presentations. Maybe I have to learn again about UCERN. Yeah, very interesting. So also thank you, everyone, thank you for being here today. So I hope you have enjoyed the presentation. So okay, we have to finish here today. So hope we can see you next time the BUE webinar in next couple of months. Okay, thank you very much.